I mean, coming from the UK, I put down here UK PLC. But what I want to do is sort of provide a sort of counter mapping of the City of London, and the city in the city, a city of regulation, of control, of police, corporatisation of public space. And I want to really focus on the way that, mainly the way that spaces, our bodies, and our resources are being mobilised to support the struggles that we have in common. And again, saying at the moment, predominantly, I find myself in terms of social movements and in terms of organising, I am not exclusively, but predominantly with a huge percentage of women in these movements. So I really want to just narrate at this kind of contemporary moment and just start before the student movement in London. So I'm actually going to start with a very familiar, well-known Stop the Lat, because even though it doesn't have any, it's not a catalyst, it was a moment in which quite a few of us, because I'm going to narrate a few of these spaces and practices, that we found ourselves in. This 24-hour seminar in 2010. They invited, certain people to be part of this seminar, then there was an open call, and then within the middle of this sort of eating together, reading, researching, discussing, at some point there was going to be a public performance, but we didn't really know what was going to materialise. So one of the spaces and collectives that I'm involved with, and Margareta Kern is also involved with, is the Precarious Workers Brigade. So, again, to give this context, I just want to read very briefly something we wrote together collectively called Fragments Toward an Understanding of a Week That Changed Everything. So, this week of November 10th, characterised now by the dramatic occupation of Millbank, and described as the event of a generation of debt, precarity and unemployment, brought 50,000 people into the streets of London. Entering the halls of Britain's Conservative Party headquarters, many of us found ourselves overwhelmed by a movement we did not know existed. Formerly tucked in the folds of student unions, further education colleges, local councils, trade unions and classrooms, a mobilisation that seemed almost unthinkable only the week before materialised before our eyes. At once beautiful and perplexing for many of us involved in the formerly benign feeling of London's cultural scene was to see how quickly so many of us, artists, lecturers, students of fashion, design, music and theatre, shed years of a neoliberal lockdown on the arts to reconjugate ourselves as active political agents. What can only be described as an ideological attack on the poor, on arts and humanities, on critical thought and production, and what little remains of the British welfare state, threw Britain into a state of crisis. In response, we demanded free education for all, for cultural assets to be managed through democratic processes, for decisions about the future of cultural and education to stay out of the hands of non-elected advisors, such as Lord Brown, former Chief Executive of British Petroleum and current Chair of Trustees of the Tate Gallery. We also shouted that our resistance to the current cuts is not a call for the restoration of New Labour's public-private confusion, but something else. The articulation of a cultural and political commons. Finally, we demanded an end to police violence and showed solidarity with those who have been arrested and against those who have suspended our rights to be in the streets. In the frenzied chronicling of this autumn of discontent and of a movement with no end in sight, it is impossible to analyse from outside, to make reviews of predictions about them, the students, artists or activists, with the force of life that has moved us from art school to art school, from campus to campus, from meeting to meeting. Those regimes of spectatorship, observation and aesthetic judgment, in all their contemporary pseudo-critical wrappings, that felt so impenetrable before, suddenly seemed anachronistic in the context here and now. And this space is an artist-run space. And we do come out of the sort of radical histories of the London Filmmakers Co-op. Yeah, so it's a community and a site for production. I suppose in some ways we do actually have a lab. We have a physical lab, a laboratory, an open studio, and we have a kind of space in which all the social knowledge sharing skills actually happens as well. We are funded by a small grant for the Arts Council. So in theory we have a kind of micromanagement structure, but in philosophy we have a collective spirit. So we sort of managing these kind of bureaucracies as a way of the space as being a holding space. And at the same time other groups meet, feminist groups meet in the space, activists, so the space is not just for film and video production, but that's its kind of legitimacy in the sort of space it takes. I'm sort of connected to historiography in the sense that I've only recently been around this group for a while, and they're also, women are present in nowhere in many ways. The Centre for Possible Studies, I've been involved as an artist in residence from 2009 to 2012. The Centre of Possible Studies is derived from encounters between artists, local people, university researchers and workers, those moving to and from the Long Edgware Road.